Welcome to the Port City Plate Podcast, presented by Bienville Bites Food Tour. The Port City Plate Podcast, serving up the food, history, and people of Mobile, Alabama, for people who love the Port City. I'm your host, Chris Andrews. I'm super excited. I got a bonus episode that I wanted to release to y'all. And, outside of our bi-weekly interviews that we've been doing and really excited about those. But this bonus episode is going to be kind of in honor of the new book that I got coming out. And A Culinary History of Mobile will be out on October the 23rd. And I'm super excited about this new book. And so I wanted to, kind of dedicate this episode to that. And talk a little bit about, some of the behind-the-scenes work on the book and, kind of my idea behind the book. Also, I have a little interview segment later on with David Rasp that I think you'll enjoy. And then we'll conclude, talking about some of the book signings and stuff I've got coming up. Mainly on October 23rd, the book launch release night. You're all invited. I really look forward to seeing everybody there. But again, like I said, A Culinary History of Mobile is something that it's been in the works for about 3 years. I started this really, I guess, it kind of goes back before. A lot of you know that I do the Bienville Bites Food Tour, and when researching stories for this tour, there was not a whole lot of food history that's been documented in Mobile. Of course, when we first started the tour, it was not primarily going to be about food history. It was about the history of Mobile, the 3 centuries of history that we have, 300 years plus, and really just kind of highlighting the landmarks. We go by places like the Battle House Hotel and the Cathedral downtown and the Battle House, places like that are just iconic. And I guess it was about, a year or two in, we started a tour called the Old Mobile Evening Tour, and that tour really focused on the food history of Mobile. And that was kind of where this idea really kind of originated, was through that tour. On that tour, and we still give that tour every Thursday night, 5:30. It's a very popular tour that we give, and it goes through the centuries of Mobile's history. So, starting at the 1700s and then moving our way to the 1800s and 1900s, and just kind of sharing some stories along the way about Mobile's food history. And so again, like I said, there's not been a whole lot of documentation, not a whole lot of books. There is one book out there called Old Mobile Restaurants by Malcolm Steiner, and that was a huge influence for me and learning a lot about Mobile's food history. But still, again, not a very publicized book, kind of one of those hidden books that you'd really only find at the library somewhere. And so, again, fast forward a couple of years, some friends, some food tour colleagues that I have. Namely Stu Card in Savannah. He owns and operates a Savannah Taste Experience in Savannah. He wrote a book about him and his brother Donald about the Savannah food history. And then Akila McConnell in Atlanta, she operates a tour called Unexpected Atlanta there in Atlanta. And so she also wrote a book, Culinary History of Atlanta. And so, just kind of having some conversations with them. They talked about how it was great for marketing their tours and things like that. And so that really got my wheels spinning. I'd say, I guess about 5 years ago or so now, about 2018, 2019, around that time. And again, just something that was always in the back of my mind. Well, when the COVID pandemic hit and we were all, the world was completely shut down, that was kind of the time that I started doing a lot of blogging and started doing a lot of writing. I had a lot of extra spare time on my hands during that time. And so I started, like I said, with some blogs. I reached out to a few writers and, a few well-known authors like John Sledge, Steve Joint that runs the Mobile Mask magazine, and was starting to do some interviews, and really that was kind of my purpose, was just to put some blogs out there and put them on the Bienville Bites website. And just kind of share some different stories that we had never done before. So that kind of got my wheels turning with some writing, and just kind of looking over a lot of the content that I had from the tours. I thought, hey, this I think we've got enough content and information here to write a book. And so I reached out to a publisher called the History Press, and that is the same publisher that published the 2 books that I mentioned earlier from the other food tour operators. And pretty quickly back, they were like, yeah, let's do this. And Not a whole lot of hesitations on their part. And so it wasn't very long that, got the green light to start the project. And of course, around that time, the world began to reopen and our tours began to reopen again. And just kind of facing everything that we did with that, kind of took my mind. I didn't have as much free time, around that time. And so it's been a very long, tedious process. A lot of you know as well, I got small kids, so there's not a whole lot of free time to write a book. And so it's been, like I said, a 3-year process. But I've discovered some incredible stories along the way. I think some stories that really haven't been told that much. I think about the jambalaya. The first 3 really times that we see the word jambalaya in the English language, it really has its background here in Mobile. And so I'm not going to make the claim in the book that jambalaya started in Mobile. We'll let somebody else kind of debate that, but you sure can make a strong case that jambalaya is as Mobile of a dish as anything else. There's also a story about a man named Francois LeMay, and he was one of the original. He was one of the original people that were here at the Mobile site. Before 1711, the old Mobile site. When it was located 27 Mile Bluff. And he would go on to New Orleans and ended up founding a bakery there called the Bellegarde Bakery. We don't know much about his time here in Mobile, but we do know he was a baker. There's no no record of anything of any kind of bakery, or certainly no record of any kind of bread that he baked or anything like that. We just know his occupation was a baker here in Mobile. That's really all we know about him. But I still find that pretty interesting that despite the lack of records, that we had a baker here and we had somebody baking bread in those early days, and combining that with some fish and some seafood and certainly having a po' boy, what we would know as a po' boy here in Old Mobile in early 1700s. So some of that food history is really incredible. There's a little story in the book. There's a very famous restaurant here in Mobile that claims it to be Mobile's oldest restaurant. They've even got it on their sign. Well, in doing some research of this book, I realized that they're not the oldest restaurant in Mobile. There is actually a restaurant older than that restaurant that claims that. So, some different stories like that. I'm thinking about, a lot of people are familiar with the banana docks that used to line the wharves of the Mobile River, along the waterfront. Come across a story about a man named Sam Zamurray. And Sam Zamurray would he would take these ripe bananas that probably were not going to make it to the Midwest, but without spoiling, he decided, so what they would usually discard those bananas. Sam Zamurray would take those discarded bananas, they were called ripes, and he would sell them to, little train stops along the way up around, say Washington County or on the way up to Selma, places like that. And, ended up, working out with some of the train conductors and things like that. People at those train stops expected Sam Zamurray to show up with some of these ripe bananas, and you think in the late 1800s, early 1900s, people hadn't never seen a banana before, so this is a very novel item, food item especially, and very, very popular. But Sam Zamurray ended up, leaving Mobile, moving on to New Orleans, and became one of the richest men in the South from the banana trade, and it's just a remarkable entrepreneurial success story. I think in the history of the United States, it's one of the most remarkable stories. And so, but anyway, him having his start here in Mobile at the banana docks, so some of these stories that, like I said, they haven't been told, and so I'm super excited to share those in the book. And I'll say too, it's if you've been on the Bienville Bites tour, you understand that our tour, we don't go to every restaurant downtown. We don't give you every single dish in Mobile to try. There are many, many other dishes and restaurants that you can try in the city of Mobile. And I feel like the book is kind of a little bit of I guess you could say it's very similar. This is not an exhaustive record of every restaurant in Mobile's history. This is not, I don't mention every restaurant in Mobile's history. It'd be impossible. I don't mention every single dish that's been popular in Mobile's history. There's just, that's not what this book's about. Like I said, it's much like the tour. It's a taste. It's a snapshot of Mobile's food scene. It's a a brief history of Mobile and its food and its history. Maybe one day there might be an exhaustive research and record recorded of Mobile's food history. It's not in this book. It's not in the 140 or so pages here in this book. But again, it's a great read. It's going to hopefully, just like the food tour, make you fall in love with Mobile, make you fall in love with its food, and keep you coming back. Just like I said, just like the food tour does. And so, I posed a question on our Port City Plate Facebook group, just asking people what they thought when they think of Mobile's food and the food scene in Mobile. And I got a lot of really good answers on that. A couple of people mentioned places like Russo's and Morrison's, and of course those are mentioned in the book. Seafood, how could we not mention seafood when you talk about Mobile, Alabama, being right here on the Mobile River, Mobile Bay, Gulf of Mexico, right? So we're incredibly blessed with great seafood. And then the iconic dishes, West Indies salad, oysters, gumbo, crab claws, all that, mentioned in the book. And so I'm really excited about it, and I can't wait for everybody to read it and get your thoughts on it. And but I've got an interview with David Rasp, and bringing him on here, and just kind of want to pick his brain a little bit. I asked David, about some things about Mobile's history and his thoughts, and he's very influential here in Mobile food scene, and he's featured, of course, with a couple of restaurants in the book as well, the Royal Scam and Hero. So here's that interview with David. Now I'm happy to welcome to this bonus episode of the Port City Plate Podcast, David Rasp. And David is the owner and founder of Hero Sports Bar and Grill and the Royal Scam. David is the only restaurateur mentioned in the book twice. And for good reason. He's responsible for two of the most iconic restaurants currently in Mobile's food scene right now. In Chapter 3 of the book, I highlight the history of Mobile's colonial period. And that period of time where the French controlled Mobile, they had just moved the town from its original site 27 miles north of where we are now to the current location in 1711. In the book, I go into detail on what the fort looked like, and most of you may be familiar with the current Fort Condé that we have in downtown Mobile, but that's a replica of the original fort that was at that site, and the current fort that we have is on a much smaller scale. So, imagine the original fort spanning blocks of modern-day Royal Street, which in that time Royal Street was the waterfront, which is kind of something interesting to think about. But the old fort would have gone west to about where the courthouse is today in downtown Mobile, going as far south, about where the current location is, maybe right there into the Fort Condé Village area. But as far north as the fort went, the outside walls would have been right there where the Royal Scam sits today. And so that's where you'll find a restaurant with dishes on that table that I think are very similar to what you would have seen on the table in Mobile in the 1700s. You would have seen fresh fish and beef, asparagus, potatoes, duck, pork, shrimp. Most importantly, I think gumbo. And I mentioned in the book that no trip to Mobile in my mind is complete without a bowl of seafood gumbo. It would be like going to Philadelphia and not getting a Philly cheesesteak, or New Orleans without a beignet. I wanted to ask you a question. I think you're as qualified to answer this as anybody that I can think of. You've been in the food and beverage scene in Mobile for the last 25 years. How would you describe the evolution that you've seen in Mobile's food scene in the last 25 years?
Well, it's a great question, because we opened up in 1998 at Heroes Downtown without a clue. We started working on it. Thankfully, the menu was smaller. That's a concept where someone like me without any experience could at least have a chance to kind of get going. And we worked our way slowly towards expanding the menu and bringing in people with expertise and learning from them and growing in that way. You would never start, I wouldn't think, a restaurant like the Royal Scam with no background in the industry, unless you were just going to be sort of the investor owner. I'm not that guy. I'll wash dishes. I'll peel shrimp. I actually enjoy, I don't like planning for me to have to participate in that way, but if somebody calls out and there's a jam situation, I enjoy the camaraderie of the kitchen environment. I like to make a contribution. Over the years, my role has changed so much, I don't contribute in the same way. I contribute in different ways. I work a lot on the projects and upgrades and renovations and those type things, but I don't mind peeling shrimp.
Yeah.
But in terms of the scene, it's interesting. We go back to 98. The number of available options in downtown Mobile then versus now, it's incredible. So it impresses me in a way that from a sales standpoint, the Heroes Downtown location specifically is where it is today because there is so much competition and so many options exist, right? Downtown Mobile, I mean, if you drop somebody here, they have a wonderful variety, if you know what I mean, from the Asian to the Mexican to great seafood. There is fine dining. There is more casual. I mean, there's almost anything I think you want in a restaurant. Depends on your situation. You're a couple and they've got young kids with them. Places like Heroes, plenty of options that are family friendly in that regard. Someone wants a dining experience. Again, you've got Noja, you've got Noble South, Royal Scam. I like to think is in that group. That I'm very proud of what downtown Mobile as a whole can offer someone, and I love it when people come in from out of town and we'll ask them if I see someone looking around, hey, are you looking for something? Can I help you find something? And we get a picture of that and we can steer them towards something that'll make them happy. So it's kind of fun to be an ambassador in that way when you love what the product is,
Right. Last question I want to ask you is, talking about 25 years, and I think one of the hardest things about writing this book is the fact that I know it's going to be outdated, right? It's not going to take it very long for this book to be outdated. I feel like Mobile's on an upswing. We've had a huge resurgence of our downtown area in the last 10 years, and I feel like that next 10 years are going to be, you're kind of looking at the same thing with the downtown airport and Brooklyn by the Bay. Some big things that are like they're fixing to happen here in Mobile. But my question for you is, you've been here 25 years. Where do you see the restaurant scene kind of going in the next 25 years? If you could look in a crystal ball.
Well, I see nothing but continued progress and growth driven by new players with new energy and new ideas and a different background. They've lived elsewhere and traveled and seen some things they want to apply. Again, the variety available today as compared to even 10 years ago, much less 25, it's incredible. So we really have some great options, but I see that continuing. And it is an industry with a high failure rate or let's say a closing rate. It's not necessarily a failure. A guy opens up a restaurant and he keeps it in business 15, 20 years and closes. Be careful. Let's not call it a failure. Mm-hmm. Perhaps it ran its course. That individual wanted to make changes in their life. It's certainly a lifestyle decision. It's not just the same as I'm going to work at this plant or this insurance company or something like that. It's different. So, but I see change happens. You got to embrace that. As I say, evolve or dissolve all the time. So I just think we're not going to have a shortage of new ideas, and I think that's going to be driven by some existing operators who want to offer something different in a different location, perhaps, a different theme, a different approach to the industry. And certainly we're not going to have a shortage of new players wanting to get into the business. They're going to bring incredible energy and passion and skill to that. So, again, I've made mention of this, but use Slurp Society as a little prototype, a little example of that. Well, we didn't have anything, a ramen shop in downtown Mobile, we didn't have that, wasn't that long ago, right? I think they're doing a great job. I see more of that kind of thing, that adds to it. And basically pushes other existing operators to continually evaluate what we do and how well we do it.
Right.
I can't sit back and say, well, we've been here 25 years, we're established. The business changes all the time. You have to continually evolve. I joked with you earlier that we got some new thing called wraps where you put the food in a tortilla instead of on a piece of bread. Well, hell, we're 25 years in and we just really started offering them regularly. We would do something like that on request, of course. But so you have to constantly be evolving and things like that. Those have been very successful items for us, but we have to constantly be looking at it. And you have to not be afraid, where menu development is concerned, to take away an item if you think its time has passed and you can only do so many things. I don't want a large menu, but I want to execute really well on what we're doing. So you have to be prepared to take good hard looks at these things, and the sales figures are a big part of that equation, although not the only part. Sometimes you have an item that you think really represents the restaurant quite well, and you're going to stick with it. But I just think you have to keep an open mind, and you have to think that ultimately the guests ultimately decide. That's my approach to that.
Yeah.
If you're not hearing the guest's voice, or if you're ignoring the guest's voice, that's going to be your downfall. So we're committed to certainly not doing that.
Yeah, that's great insight. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this, David.
My pleasure. It's great to be with you. Great luck with the book. We're excited about that. And continued success with Bienville Bites. I mean, you're doing a great job. You're a very valuable part of this ecosystem. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I really appreciate David coming on and sharing his thoughts on Mobile's food scene and just kind of some of his iconic dishes. And so I kind of wanted to go through, each chapter and just kind of preview each chapter for you. Got 12 chapters in this book. You'll find the first section, part 1, is going to be about Mobile's culinary heritage. So this is going to be, the pre-Native American days, the early 1700s, Mobile's old site when it was at 27 Mile Bluff. So a lot of history there. I've tied in a local restaurant with each of these chapters. Chapter 1, I talk about oysters, Native Americans, and Wintzell's Oyster House. That's the restaurant I tied in with Chapter 1. Chapter 2, talk about the founding of Mobile and how the city was founded. Tie that into Squid Ink. I think that's a really interesting story there. And if you've been to Squid Ink, you're probably familiar with the Cadillac Wall. And so you'll see a lot of similarities there. Chapter 3, talking about colonial Mobile and old Mobile. And of course, that's where I tied in the Royal Scam. And talking certainly about their gumbo that they have, and talking about gumbo, as a dish. Part 2 of the book, the next 3 chapters are, really about the 1800s, and harvest and hardship is kind of the name of that part 2. Chapter 4, I talk about the culinary scene in Mobile in the 1800s. That's where we started to come. Our first restaurants came about 1830s, and so a lot of oyster saloons, places like that. Also tied in Callahan's. That was my restaurant for the 1800s. Callahan's Irish Social Club, one of the iconic places in Mobile. Chapter 5, talk about from chains to freedom. This is the story of Kazoola and African American foodways in Mobile. And so we talk about the African American history of Mobile. And I tied that one into Kazoola. And if you've been to Kazoola in downtown Mobile, you'll know it's an iconic place that so many people go. And just the story of Africa Town, the Clotilda and Cudjo Lewis is a story that you can't tell Mobile's history without telling that story. 6th chapter is the A&M Peanut Shop, and I talk about that and talk about its similarities with the Civil War. Talk about Civil War era Mobile, and we talk about some of the really just interesting stories about Mobile's time there and the A&M Peanut Shop. It's just it's a treasure, and we're so fortunate to have that here in Mobile. And so I can't wait to tell you some of those stories as well. The part 3 is going to be some of the immigrant influences of Mobile, and as well as the 20th century. So moving ahead there, I talk about the chapter 7, the culinary scene of Mobile in the 1900s. Tie that into the Dewdrop Inn, one of the most iconic places in Mobile, the Dewdrop. 8th chapter, really going in detail on the Greek immigrants and their impact here in Mobile's food and the history. What a story the Greeks how they have contributed to our food scene. It's incredible. Tied in 3 Georges. That's one of Mobile's oldest places to eat. 9th chapter, talk about a little prohibition. So that's kind of a fun chapter. Digging into some of those stories were really interesting. Also talk about our Cuban connection to Mobile in that chapter, and it has a lot to do with prohibition. But even going back to our founding, so I found a lot of good stories about Mobile's connection with Cuba, tying that in, of course, with La Floriditas, which is our Cuban speakeasy in downtown Mobile. And it's such a fun place. 10th chapter, well, the part 4, that's the next 3 chapters, the last 3, are about Mobile's 21st century. And so I had a lot of fun talking about that. 10th chapter is about Mardi Gras. Of course, talk about king cake and moon pies, tying that into the Joe Cane Cafe downtown, and talking about Joe Cane and Mardi Gras. Again, one of those things you couldn't tell Mobile's story without talking about Mardi Gras. The 11th chapter is about Mobile sports history, and so I talk about Satchel Paige and Hank Aaron, Billy Williams. We have 5 baseball Hall of Famers that are from Mobile, and just we have an incredible sports scene in Mobile that doesn't get enough love. tied in Hero Sports Bar. And, of course, that's a place where, many people go to watch a game here in Mobile. And the 12th chapter is really about the Mobile's 21st century food scene. And I tied that one into the Cheese Cottage. I feel like that the Cheese Cottage kind of represents, it's in an old historic building, and they've taken that old building that was a former filling station and turned it into a restaurant, serving just an incredible array of cheese boards and sandwiches. And so it really is a picture in my mind of downtown Mobile, how, things were vacant, say 40 years ago, 30 years ago. A lot of buildings were vacant. And you've just seen this revitalization, especially in the last 10 years, of just our incredible food scene. And I feel like nothing encapsulates that picture better than the Cheese Cottage downtown. And so I talk about, of course, how that evolution has occurred. And really kind of, the story of Mobile and how we've grown as well. And so a lot of popular places that, but again, so many. This is not an exhaustive history, even of the 21st century. I could have done, of course, I could have spent time and done just pages of just the 21st century with what I'm very familiar with, so much less, any of these other time periods that I just briefly talk about. So that's the book. That's a good rundown. This has been a good rundown episode, I think, and kind of an overview of what you can expect. I like I said, October 23rd, bookstores everywhere. You'll find the Culinary History of Mobile. You'll find it on Amazon. But most importantly, I'd love to meet you. And I've got the first book release party coming out October 23rd at the Haunted Bookshop, 5:30 to 7:30. Please come out. Please, I'd love to see you there. That's going to be the night of the release. Of course, they'll have some some signed copies there. I'll be signing copies, but we're going to have some food from some local restaurants that are mentioned in the book. Wintzell's going to be having some food. Three Georgia's going to be bringing by some pralines. Squid Ink's going to be bringing by some food. So if you get there early enough for the food, stay for that. Enjoy it. But like I said, most of all, can't wait to talk to you. Can't wait to put one of these books in your hands, sign a copy of it for you, and hear what you think about it. I've also got another event coming up on November the 3rd. That's a Friday evening. It's going to be at Braided River Brewing. They're going to be opening up the doors for us, for me there to, again, sign some books. We'll also have a cool, I'm really excited about this, little brewery tour for people who come to the book signing. And so come on out for that. 5 to 7, that's going to be the time frame there. So, before the Friday night football games, I think you could probably come out, come see me at Braided River Brewing. So anyway, thanks for listening to this episode. Thank you for being such a loyal following and incredible, just the feedback I've just gotten all around, not just from Bienville Bites and the food tour, but, from the podcast and these interviews we've been doing. And then from the book, just all your comments have been, just really been heartwarming for me, to see how many people are willing to support and talk about Mobile's food, especially. So, I really can't thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much. And, can't wait to see you at the book release party, October 23rd. And can't wait for you to continue listening to more episodes of the Port City Plate podcast.